James Carter had just finished his long shift at the local grocery store, wiping the sweat from his forehead as he stepped out into the evening air. The city streets were alive with the usual buzz of activity, cars honking in the distance, the faint smell of food from a nearby corner shop, and people walking hurriedly to their destinations. For James, the walk home was a brief moment of peace, a time to reflect on the day's work and think about what he would have for dinner. He had no enemies, no conflicts, and nothing in his life that could predict what was about to happen. As he walked past the rows of brick buildings that lined the quiet street, James noticed a few cars parked oddly at the corner. Before he could think much of it, a group of ICE officers stepped out from behind the vehicles. They were in full uniform, their badges glinting in the dim streetlight, and they moved with an intensity that immediately made James pause. He raised his hands slightly, instinctively signaling that he meant no harm. "Sir, we need to talk to you," one officer said firmly. James nodded, keeping his voice calm as he replied, "Sure, officer. What is this about?" He could feel the tension in the air, the kind that makes your heart beat faster even when you are completely innocent. James had encountered police before, but nothing like this. There was something about the urgency in the officers' movements, the way they positioned themselves around him, that made him uneasy. He took slow, careful steps, hoping to cooperate fully. James knew he had nothing to hide. He had all his identification ready and had always obeyed the law. But as he spoke, explaining his name and address, one officer's demeanor changed. The officer's hand moved toward the device strapped to his belt, a stun gun, and before James could react or even understand what was happening, a sudden jolt of electricity hit his body. Pain shot through his muscles like fire, causing him to collapse partially to the ground. The shock made him gasp, his eyes widening in disbelief. The world spun around James as he tried to catch his breath. He could hear the faint murmurs of officers giving orders, but the words were distant and muffled. Every nerve in his body tingled painfully, and he felt a wave of panic rising inside him. He had never imagined that something like this could happen to him while simply walking home from work. Neighbors, alerted by the commotion, peeked out from their windows. Some grabbed their phones and began recording what they were witnessing. A shop owner across the street stepped outside, his expression a mix of concern and shock. He had lived in the neighborhood for years and had seen police come and go, but he had never seen such an aggressive action against a man who was clearly unarmed and calm. James tried to stand, but the pain coursing through his body made it difficult. He raised his hands again, hoping to show that he was not resisting. "I'm not fighting," he said, his voice shaking from both fear and pain. "Please, I'm cooperating." Despite his efforts, the officers continued to assert control, one of them keeping the stun gun at the ready. James could see the tension in the faces of the witnesses. They whispered to each other, their voices filled with disbelief. The situation seemed disproportionate, escalating far beyond what any reasonable person would expect for a simple encounter. As James leaned against the wall for support, trying to steady himself, a young woman across the street shouted, "He's not doing anything wrong." Her voice carried across the street, drawing more attention from people nearby. More neighbors stepped out, some calling emergency services, others simply standing to witness what was happening. The presence of witnesses seemed to make a subtle difference. The officers paused momentarily, their actions now being recorded and observed by several people. Medical personnel arrived within minutes after the first calls to 911. They quickly assessed James's condition, noting the burn marks and muscle spasms caused by the stun gun. James winced as they carefully examined him, explaining what had happened. He felt a mixture of relief and humiliation, relief that help had come, but humiliation because he had been treated in a way that made him feel powerless and exposed. The officers finally lowered their weapons, and James was assisted to a seated position. He could see the concern on the faces of the medics and the witnesses, many of whom were shaking their heads in disbelief. They whispered among themselves, discussing how unnecessary the situation had been. "He wasn't resisting," one woman said quietly, almost to herself, and yet they treated him like a threat. News crews arrived shortly after, setting up cameras and interviewing witnesses. Video footage captured the incident from multiple angles, showing the moment when James was shocked and the expressions of confusion and fear on his face. The media coverage spread quickly, turning what had been a quiet evening walk into a national story about excessive use of force. James's friends and family were quickly informed. His sister arrived at the scene, her face pale and her hands trembling. She held his hand tightly, whispering words of comfort and reassurance. "You're okay," she said, though both of them knew that the experience would stay with him for a long time. "We're going to make sure this is handled properly." The local community, hearing about the incident, began to mobilize. People gathered near the site where the incident occurred, demanding answers and calling for accountability. Flyers were posted, social media campaigns began, and the story spread beyond the neighborhood. It became a rallying point for discussions about fairness, race, and law enforcement procedures. For James, the experience was life-changing. He spent the night reflecting on how quickly an ordinary situation could turn dangerous, even when a person was doing everything right. He thought about the fear he had felt, the pain that had shot through his body, and the way his sense of safety had been shaken in an instant. Yet, amidst the trauma, he also felt a spark of determination. He knew that what happened to him should not be ignored. James began documenting everything he remembered, from the officer's words to the sequence of events and his own physical and emotional reactions. He saved the video footage from witnesses, took photographs of his injuries, and wrote detailed notes. Every detail mattered, every small observation could help build a case that justice be served. The story of the incident quickly became part of broader discussions about law enforcement accountability, particularly the use of force against African American individuals. Civil rights groups and local activists cited James's experience as an example of why more oversight and training were needed. They emphasized that no person should be subjected to unnecessary violence, especially when they pose no threat. James, though shaken, also became a voice in the community. He spoke at small gatherings, sharing his story to raise awareness and inspire change. He emphasized the importance of remaining calm, documenting events, and seeking justice through proper channels. Even in pain, he found strength in knowing that his story could prevent others from experiencing the same fear and humiliation. As part one of James's journey ends, the incident serves as both a moment of personal trauma and the spark for broader societal attention. What had begun as a simple walk home became a pivotal event that would affect James, his family, the community, and the officers involved. It was a reminder of the fragile balance between authority and responsibility, and the need for accountability in every action. After the shocking incident with ICE, James Carter returned home that evening feeling a mixture of pain, fear, and confusion. His body still throbbed from the unexpected shock of the stun gun, but the emotional wounds were even deeper. Sitting on his small couch, he stared at the ceiling, replaying every moment of what had happened. The images of the officers, the sudden pain, and the fear that had gripped him felt unreal. He had always trusted that following the rules and staying calm would keep him safe, but that trust had been shattered in a single moment. James's phone rang repeatedly that night. Friends and family were checking in, expressing their shock and concern. His sister, Melissa, called more than once, her voice trembling. "James, I can't believe this happened," she said. "Are you okay? Did they hurt you badly?" James tried to reassure her, though he knew words could not fully convey what he felt. "I'm okay, Melissa. Just shaken. I've never been treated like that before," he replied, his voice steady despite the lingering tension. Even after he hung up, James couldn't stop thinking about the witnesses who had stepped forward. The shop owner who had recorded the incident, the young woman who had shouted from across the street, and neighbors who had called 911. They had all played a role in ensuring the situation was visible. Without them, the story might have been forgotten, dismissed as another routine law enforcement action. Instead, their courage gave James hope that justice could be pursued. The following day, James visited a local medical clinic to check for any lasting physical injuries. The doctor examined the small burns left by the stun gun and noted the muscle soreness and stress-related symptoms. "It's important that you take care of yourself, both physically and mentally," the doctor advised. "Incidents like this can cause trauma even if there are no major injuries." James nodded silently, realizing that the pain wasn't just physical. Every step he took that day reminded him of the shock. Every memory of the officers' faces brought back fear. Meanwhile, the news of the incident spread quickly. Social media posts with video footage went viral, and local news channels began reporting on what had happened. James watched in disbelief as his name and story appeared on television and online. His neighbors and friends shared articles expressing outrage and support. The comments reflected a mix of anger, sympathy, and concern about the broader issues of law enforcement and racial bias. For James, it was overwhelming, but he also understood that public attention could help prevent similar incidents in the future. Community leaders and activists reached out to offer assistance. They emphasized that James should not face the aftermath alone and that the incident had implications beyond his personal experience. Meetings were organized, discussing how to support him legally and emotionally. James was connected with civil rights organizations that specialized in cases of excessive force and racial injustice. These groups offered guidance on collecting evidence, filing complaints, and ensuring that the incident was formally investigated. Despite the growing support, James struggled with his mental health. He experienced nightmares, flashbacks, and sudden anxiety attacks. Simple tasks like walking down the street or answering a knock at the door became stressful. The trust he had once had in authority figures was shaken. He found himself constantly thinking, "What if it happens again, or what if no one believes me?" These questions lingered, feeding his worry and frustration. James decided to document everything. He wrote detailed accounts of the incident, describing not just the physical events but also his emotions at each moment. He collected statements from witnesses, saved all media coverage, and took photographs of his injuries. Every note, every piece of evidence was a way to reclaim some control over a situation that had made him feel powerless. The act of recording the details was therapeutic in a small way, helping him process the shock while preparing for potential legal actions. The local community responded with solidarity. Neighborhood meetings were held where residents discussed the incident and ways to prevent similar situations. Flyers were distributed encouraging people to speak up if they witnessed injustice. Social media campaigns raised awareness, and hashtags promoting accountability circulated widely. James attended some of these meetings, initially hesitant, but gradually he realized that his voice could make a difference. He began sharing his story, emphasizing that the issue was not just about him but about ensuring that law enforcement treated everyone fairly and safely. As the days passed, public pressure mounted. Calls for an official investigation grew louder, and the local ICE office faced increasing scrutiny. News outlets interviewed witnesses and experts, analyzing the footage and questioning the necessity of using a stun gun on a calm, compliant individual. Civil rights advocates spoke about systemic issues in law enforcement, pointing to patterns of excessive force and the importance of oversight. James, though not seeking attention, became a central figure in these discussions, representing the human face behind the incident. James's friends offered emotional support and practical help. Some accompanied him to appointments, others helped manage media inquiries, and a few even assisted in organizing community meetings. Their presence reminded him that he was not alone and that collective effort could lead to change. In these moments, James began to feel a sense of purpose emerge from the chaos. He realized that while the incident had caused deep harm, it could also serve as a catalyst for awareness and reform. At the same time, James faced challenges. He received mixed reactions from people who questioned his account or implied that he had provoked the situation. These moments were frustrating and disheartening, reinforcing the need for a formal investigation and legal action. James remained steadfast, knowing that truth and evidence would ultimately speak louder than rumors or assumptions. The local authorities began reviewing the incident, opening inquiries into the officer's actions. Internal ICE reports and statements from witnesses were collected, analyzed, and compared. The process was slow and formal, but James followed it closely, attending meetings and providing testimony when required. Each step was emotionally taxing, but it also reinforced the idea that accountability was possible. In his quiet moments at home, James reflected on how drastically his life had changed in a single evening. He thought about the physical pain, the emotional turmoil, and the way the community had rallied around him. He considered the fear that still lingered, the flashes of anger and frustration, and the hope that justice could be achieved. Through it all, he realized that he had to find ways to cope, to maintain his daily life, and to prepare for the challenges ahead. James also began speaking publicly about his experience. Small gatherings at community centers allowed him to share his story in his own words. He emphasized the importance of cooperation, documentation, and advocacy. He encouraged others to stand up against injustice, highlighting that one voice could inspire change, especially when supported by community and evidence. These talks were both empowering and healing, helping James transform his trauma into action. As part 2 of James's story concludes, the focus shifts from the immediate shock of the incident to its wider impact. The personal, emotional consequences are clear, but so is the growing awareness of systemic issues. James's experience sparked conversations in his community, drew national attention, and highlighted the importance of accountability in law enforcement. What began as a moment of violence became a story of resilience, advocacy, and the pursuit of justice. James's journey was just beginning. The incident had set in motion a series of events that would challenge him, test his patience, and ultimately demand courage and determination. Yet, through the pain and uncertainty, James discovered strength in community, in advocacy, and in the belief that truth and justice could prevail. The following weeks brought a whirlwind of meetings, calls, and paperwork. James Carter quickly realized that seeking justice was not a simple path. While the community continued to offer emotional support, the formal process was slow and methodical, requiring patience, attention to detail, and constant vigilance. The incident was now under official scrutiny, and James needed to ensure that his side of the story was recorded accurately and clearly. ICE had launched an internal review, a standard procedure when complaints of excessive force were filed. James learned that the officers involved were being questioned separately, their reports compared against the video evidence and eyewitness accounts. He understood that the process could take time, and that outcomes were not guaranteed. The thought of the officers defending their actions, claiming they had acted appropriately, was frustrating, but James was determined to remain focused on the facts and evidence. James met with attorneys from a civil rights organization who specialized in cases involving law enforcement misconduct. They explained the legal avenues available to him, including filing a complaint with ICE, seeking damages, and pursuing accountability through federal courts if necessary. They stressed the importance of detailed documentation, consistent statements, and avoiding anything that could be misinterpreted. Every word James had written in his journal, every witness statement, and every video clip became crucial pieces of the puzzle. During these meetings, James also learned more about how law enforcement agencies handled internal investigations. He discovered that officers often had the benefit of legal representation during inquiries and that the agency's priority sometimes leaned toward protecting its employees. This realization was discouraging, but he refused to be intimidated. He reminded himself that his experience mattered, that he had been harmed unnecessarily, and that the truth had the power to prevail. As part of the legal preparation, James attended several interviews and depositions. Each session was emotionally exhausting. He had to recount the incident in minute detail, describe the fear he felt, the pain he endured, and the way the officers had disregarded his rights. Every time he spoke, memories of the stun gun's shock and the humiliation of being treated like a threat despite his compliance resurfaced. Yet, he also felt a growing sense of purpose. Speaking the truth repeatedly, under official circumstances, reinforced that his story mattered. Meanwhile, the news coverage continued. Local and national outlets followed the case closely, analyzing the incident and its broader implications. Experts on law enforcement and civil rights commented on the unnecessary use of force and the potential patterns of racial bias in certain agencies. The public began discussing not only James's experience but also larger questions about accountability, training, and community trust. James found this attention both overwhelming and encouraging. It was difficult to be in the spotlight, but the awareness it generated could help prevent similar incidents in the future. James also worked closely with community organizers to maintain momentum. They planned public forums, peaceful rallies, and educational workshops focused on understanding one's rights when interacting with law enforcement. James shared his story during these events, emphasizing that preparation and knowledge were key. He wanted people to understand that while law enforcement was meant to protect, there were moments when systems failed, and awareness could make a difference. At the same time, James faced personal challenges. The stress of the ongoing investigation affected his sleep, his appetite, and his concentration at work. He struggled with anxiety, particularly when thinking about future interactions with law enforcement. Even routine activities, like running errands or visiting public spaces, caused unease. He sought counseling to help manage these feelings, attending sessions that focused on coping mechanisms, mindfulness, and resilience. Over time, he began to regain a sense of stability, though the memory of the incident remained vivid. James's family remained an essential support system. His sister Melissa visited frequently, offering comfort and encouragement. "You are not alone in this," she reminded him. "We will see this through, together." His parents also expressed unwavering support, attending meetings and helping manage correspondence with legal representatives. Their presence reminded James that while the battle ahead was challenging, he had a strong foundation to lean on. The ICE investigation revealed troubling details. According to reports, the officer who had used the stun gun had a history of complaints regarding excessive force. While some had been dismissed or downplayed, this pattern strengthened the case that the action against James was unnecessary and avoidable. The internal review also noted inconsistencies in the officer's accounts compared to video evidence and witness statements. These findings were significant, signaling that James's claims were credible and supported by objective observations. As the legal team prepared the case, they also explored potential settlements and civil actions. James was advised about the possibility of seeking compensation for physical injuries, emotional distress, and punitive damages. While financial restitution was not James's primary goal, it represented a form of acknowledgement that the harm he suffered was real and unjust. He wanted accountability above all, but he also understood that a formal resolution could help prevent similar incidents from happening to others. Throughout this process, James became increasingly aware of the broader societal implications. The incident was not an isolated event, it reflected systemic challenges that affected many individuals, particularly people of color. He began writing opinion pieces for local newspapers and online platforms, sharing his experience and advocating for better training, oversight, and transparency in law enforcement agencies. These writings were widely shared, sparking conversations in schools, workplaces, and community centers. James realized that his personal experience could serve as a catalyst for education and reform. At the same time, public attention brought new pressures. Some people questioned the validity of his claims, while others criticized him for going public. Social media, while helpful in raising awareness, also exposed him to negative comments and harassment. James had to learn how to navigate these challenges, balancing transparency with self-protection. He focused on the support from allies, legal experts, and community members who understood the importance of accountability. The legal process also involved meetings with law enforcement oversight boards. These sessions were formal, sometimes intimidating, but necessary to ensure that the complaint was thoroughly reviewed. James presented his evidence, answered questions, and emphasized the need for fairness and impartiality. Observing the scrutiny of the officer's actions, he felt a mix of apprehension and hope. Each review brought him closer to the possibility of official recognition that the stun gun had been used unnecessarily. In these months, James developed a deeper understanding of resilience. He learned that patience, persistence, and preparation were essential in navigating complex systems. Each interview, each meeting, and each statement contributed to building a case that was strong and credible. The support from his community, family, and legal team reinforced that he was not facing this challenge alone. As Part 3 concludes, the story highlights the rigorous process of pursuing justice after an unjust use of force. James navigates legal proceedings, internal investigations, and public scrutiny, all while managing personal challenges. His journey reflects not only his determination to seek accountability but also the importance of preparation, documentation, and advocacy. The incident that caused him pain and fear has now become a driving force for awareness, education, and systemic reflection. James's experience shows that while seeking justice can be a complex and emotionally demanding journey, it is possible when supported by evidence, community, and perseverance. He is no longer just a victim of an incident, he is an advocate, a voice for accountability, and a reminder that systemic change often begins with the courage of a single individual willing to speak out. The day of the trial arrived with a mixture of anxiety, hope, and determination. James woke up earlier than usual, feeling a tension in his chest that would not go away. The past months of preparation, meetings, interviews, and legal consultations had led to this moment. He knew that the courtroom would be a place of confrontation, but it was also a place where truth could be presented and justice could begin to take shape. James and his legal team arrived at the courthouse early, navigating the security checkpoints and crowded hallways. The building was imposing, filled with the quiet hum of people moving about their business, lawyers discussing cases in low voices, and court officers maintaining order. Despite the grandeur and seriousness of the surroundings, James reminded himself to focus, to breathe, and to stay grounded. This was the place where he could finally present his experience and seek acknowledgement for the harm he had suffered. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense. The judge presided from the front, calm and composed, while the officers involved in the incident sat with their attorneys, prepared to defend their actions. Members of the public, journalists, and supporters filled the benches behind James, their presence a silent form of encouragement. Every face in the room seemed to carry a story or a stake in what was about to unfold. The trial began with opening statements from both sides. James's attorneys spoke first, carefully laying out the sequence of events that led to the unnecessary use of the stun gun. They highlighted key details: James's compliance, the lack of immediate threat, and the excessive nature of the force used. They emphasized that the officers' actions were not justified, presenting preliminary evidence, including video footage, eyewitness accounts, and medical reports documenting James's injuries. When it was the officers' turn, their lawyers argued that the actions taken were within the bounds of protocol and training. They described the officers as responding to a perceived threat and maintaining safety. James listened carefully, noting the way facts could be interpreted differently depending on perspective. It was frustrating to hear justifications for actions that had caused him real pain, but he remained composed, knowing that the truth would come through evidence and testimony. The first witnesses were called. Eyewitnesses who had seen the incident from a distance described their observations, emphasizing that James had been calm and compliant throughout the interaction. Their testimonies were detailed and consistent, reinforcing the narrative that the use of the stun gun had been unnecessary. The witnesses' statements were sometimes emotional, reflecting the discomfort and concern they felt while watching the event unfold. James felt a sense of relief and validation as he listened, realizing that others had seen the incident as he had experienced it. Medical experts then testified about the physical effects of stun guns and the specific injuries James had sustained. They explained in clear terms how the device works, the potential for unnecessary harm, and the impact of such experiences on mental and emotional health. The experts emphasized that James's injuries were consistent with an excessive application of force, supporting his claim that the stun gun had not been necessary. These testimonies added a layer of scientific credibility to the case, strengthening James's position and highlighting the seriousness of the incident. Throughout the proceedings, James observed the officers' demeanor and responses. Some seemed defensive, while others appeared uncomfortable as they answered questions under oath. Each response was carefully analyzed by his attorneys, who were quick to address inconsistencies or omissions. The legal team worked efficiently, making sure that every detail that could support James's claims was highlighted for the court. The cross-examinations were particularly challenging. James's attorneys faced questions aimed at testing the validity of evidence and challenging witness credibility. Each answer required focus, honesty, and clarity. Similarly, when the officers were cross-examined, inconsistencies in their statements became more apparent, and the video footage contradicted some of their claims. The tension in the room was palpable, as both sides navigated the delicate balance between legal strategy and the pursuit of truth. As the trial progressed, the emotional weight of the experience became more apparent for James. He recalled the fear he had felt during the incident, the shock of the stun gun, and the sense of injustice that had lingered in the weeks afterward. Speaking about these feelings in the courtroom was difficult, but he understood that conveying the human impact of the event was essential. The judge and jury needed to understand not just the facts but also the personal consequences of unnecessary force. The media coverage outside the courtroom continued to draw attention. Reporters updated the public on the trial's progress, sometimes broadcasting live feeds and summarizing testimonies. While this brought additional pressure, it also reminded James of the importance of visibility in cases like his. Public awareness could help prevent similar incidents and encourage accountability within law enforcement agencies. James's support network was ever present. Family members, friends, and community advocates attended the trial regularly, sitting quietly in the gallery but offering silent encouragement. Their presence provided emotional stability, a reminder that he was not facing the challenge alone. James drew strength from seeing familiar faces, knowing that each day of testimony was a step toward accountability and recognition of the harm he had suffered. During breaks in the proceedings, James often reflected on the broader significance of the case. While it was deeply personal, it was also part of a larger conversation about law enforcement, racial bias, and the use of force. He understood that the outcome could influence future practices and serve as a precedent for how similar incidents are handled. This realization was both daunting and motivating, reinforcing his commitment to pursuing justice not just for himself but for others who might face similar circumstances. As the trial neared its conclusion, closing statements were made. James's attorneys summarized the evidence, reinforcing the narrative of unnecessary use of force, the credibility of witnesses, and the physical and emotional harm suffered. They urged the judge and jury to consider the facts carefully, to hold the officers accountable, and to ensure that actions like this do not go unaddressed. The officers' lawyers emphasized the challenges of law enforcement, the need for quick decision-making, and the intent to maintain safety. Finally, the moment of anticipation arrived, the judge or jury would deliberate and deliver a decision. The room was tense, filled with quiet murmurs and focused expressions. James felt a mixture of nervousness and hope, knowing that the outcome could change his life in profound ways. He reflected on the months of preparation, the support of his community, and the courage it had taken to speak out. No matter the result, he knew he had taken a stand for truth and accountability. While waiting for the verdict, James thought about the journey so far. The incident had been frightening and unjust, but it had also revealed his resilience, the strength of his support system, and the importance of standing up for one's rights. Each step from the initial encounter to the courtroom proceedings had been a testament to his determination and the power of documented evidence, credible testimony, and perseverance. As the courtroom doors opened and the decision was announced, James felt a surge of emotions. Relief, validation, and a sense of accomplishment mingled together. The verdict recognized that the stun gun had been used unnecessarily, holding the responsible officer accountable and sending a message about the importance of restraint and proper conduct. For James, it was more than just a legal victory, it was an affirmation that speaking out against injustice could lead to meaningful change. The trial's conclusion marked the beginning of a new chapter. James knew that the path toward broader reform and education about law enforcement practices would continue, but the experience had already transformed him. He had become an advocate, a voice for accountability, and an example of resilience. The courtroom, once intimidating and tense, had become a place where truth was recognized, and justice was pursued. After the verdict was announced, James felt a wave of emotions he had not expected. Relief, gratitude, and a sense of accomplishment washed over him like a warm tide. For weeks, he had carried the weight of the trial, replaying the incident in his mind, worrying about what the outcome might be. Now, with the recognition of the unnecessary use of force, a sense of closure began to settle, though he knew the journey of healing and advocacy was just beginning. The days following the trial were filled with reflection. James spent time with his family, sharing quiet moments that reminded him of the support that had carried him through the most difficult days. His parents and siblings were proud, not just of the legal victory, but of his courage, his patience, and the way he had handled himself throughout the ordeal. Friends and supporters reached out, offering congratulations and words of encouragement. James realized that while the trial had been about his experience, the broader message it sent was inspiring people to stand up for justice and fairness. James also spent time reflecting on his own feelings. The trauma of the incident had left marks on him, both physically and emotionally. The memory of the stun gun's impact, the fear he had felt, and the sense of helplessness lingered, even after the legal battle was over. He recognized that healing would take time, and he allowed himself to acknowledge these feelings without judgment. Counseling sessions, conversations with trusted friends, and moments of quiet meditation became important tools for processing the experience. He understood that personal healing was as important as legal justice, and that taking care of his mental and emotional well-being would empower him to move forward fully. At the same time, James began thinking about the larger implications of the case. He realized that the incident was not isolated, it reflected a broader pattern that needed attention. The media coverage of the trial had sparked conversations about law enforcement practices, racial bias, and the use of force. James received messages from people who had experienced similar situations, expressing their gratitude for his courage and sharing their own stories. The realization that his experience could help others was powerful, and it motivated him to use his voice to advocate for change. James started participating in community events focused on education and awareness. He spoke at local gatherings, explaining the importance of understanding citizens' rights and the responsibility of law enforcement officers to use force appropriately. His story resonated with many people, creating an atmosphere of empathy and understanding. He emphasized that justice was not only about punishment but also about prevention, ensuring that incidents like his did not happen to others. Through these efforts, James found a renewed sense of purpose, transforming a painful experience into an opportunity to make a positive difference. The trial also led to discussions with local authorities and advocacy groups. James met with law enforcement officials, legal experts, and community leaders to discuss training programs, accountability measures, and ways to improve interactions between officers and citizens. He advocated for clear protocols on the use of force, emphasizing the need for de-escalation techniques and cultural sensitivity. These meetings were sometimes challenging, as differing perspectives and priorities came into play, but James approached them with patience and determination. He listened, asked questions, and shared his experience thoughtfully, making it clear that meaningful change required collaboration and understanding. Social media continued to play a role in spreading awareness. James shared his reflections, updates on advocacy initiatives, and educational materials about citizens' rights and safety. Many people engaged with his posts, sharing their own experiences, asking questions, and offering support. The online community became a platform for dialogue, connecting people who cared about justice, accountability, and fair treatment. James recognized that technology could be a tool for empowerment, allowing stories like his to reach a wide audience and inspire action. As time passed, James noticed changes in himself. The trial and its aftermath had strengthened his resilience and confidence. He felt more comfortable speaking up, more aware of his rights, and more committed to standing up for fairness in every aspect of his life. The experience had taught him patience, strategic thinking, and the importance of preparation. He understood that challenges were part of life, but how one responds to them could define the outcome. James felt a growing sense of responsibility to use his voice and experience to help others navigate similar situations. James's family also observed changes in him. They noticed his increased focus on advocacy, his dedication to community service, and his thoughtful reflections on social issues. They were proud of his courage and integrity, and their support became an even stronger foundation for his continued work. Together, they celebrated milestones, shared stories, and encouraged one another to stay committed to their values and goals. The bond between James and his loved ones had grown deeper through the shared experience of facing adversity and witnessing justice. The impact of the case reached beyond James's immediate circle. Local schools and community organizations invited him to speak to students and young adults about the importance of standing up for one's rights, understanding law enforcement procedures, and fostering respectful interactions. His presentations were engaging, filled with personal anecdotes, practical advice, and encouragement. Young people were inspired by his story, seeing that one person's courage could influence change and that they too could take action to make their communities safer and more just. Over time, James also worked on personal projects that reflected his commitment to justice and awareness. He collaborated with writers, educators, and advocates to create materials that could be used in schools and community centers. These included guides on handling confrontations with law enforcement, understanding legal rights, and promoting peaceful conflict resolution. James's efforts were recognized by community leaders, media outlets, and advocacy groups, further amplifying his message and reach. Despite the challenges he had faced, James found moments of joy and fulfillment. He spent more time with friends and family, exploring hobbies and interests that had been set aside during the stressful months of the trial. He traveled, connected with nature, and enjoyed simple pleasures, recognizing that life continued beyond the courtroom. These moments of normalcy were vital for his well-being, providing balance and perspective as he continued his advocacy work. Reflecting on the entire journey, James realized the importance of perseverance, courage, and integrity. The incident had been traumatic, but it had also revealed the strength within him and the power of speaking out. He had learned that justice is not always immediate, that systems can be complex, and that advocacy requires patience, knowledge, and determination. Most importantly, he had seen that one person's actions could inspire others and contribute to meaningful change. James's story also highlighted the importance of community. The support of his family, friends, legal team, and advocates had been crucial in navigating the difficult months. Their encouragement provided strength, guidance, and motivation, demonstrating the value of solidarity in times of challenge. James felt grateful for the collective effort that had helped bring recognition and accountability to the situation. In the months and years that followed, James continued to balance personal growth with community engagement. He pursued opportunities to educate, inform, and inspire others, using his experience as a platform for positive change. His journey was a reminder that even in the face of injustice, resilience, integrity, and courage could lead to meaningful outcomes. Each conversation, presentation, and initiative reinforced the lessons he had learned, creating a ripple effect that reached far beyond his immediate circle. Ultimately, James's experience was transformative. The encounter with unnecessary force, the trial, and the subsequent advocacy had shaped his perspective, strengthened his character, and deepened his commitment to justice. While the pain of the incident could never be fully erased, it had been transformed into a source of empowerment and purpose. James had turned a moment of adversity into a lifelong mission to make the world a more fair, informed, and compassionate place. Through it all, James remained grounded in the knowledge that his journey was not just about personal vindication but about contributing to a larger movement for accountability, fairness, and justice. His story served as a testament to resilience, the importance of speaking out, and the impact that one person can have when they refuse to remain silent in the face of wrongdoing. With determination in his heart and a vision for a better future, James continued forward, carrying the lessons of the past while shaping a more just world for the future.